So if you want to learn how to hack or get into the IT field, or you just like testing and breaking new hardware and software, you're gonna need to know virtualization. And in this video, I'm gonna explain to you what virtualization is. I'm gonna break it down Barney style so it's super easy to understand. And I'm gonna actually help you set up your own virtual environment for free. That's a few easy steps and it's easy to do on something just like this little laptop here. Now, if you're new to IT and this sounds super complex, don't worry. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and first tell you what virtual machines are. And from there, you're going to go ahead and download your own hypervisor, which is how we do our virtualization. We're going to actually install it, configure it, and actually also install two different virtual machines. Your first two virtual machines, we're going to do Kali Linux, which is a great operating system if you want to learn how to hack. And we're also going to install Ubuntu, which is great if you want to get familiar with Linux, but still kind of have a graphical user interface that's kind of similar to Windows. I'll also leave timestamps down below so you can skip ahead as needed. But anyways, I just finished up my coffee, so I'm ready to get into this. Let's go ahead and dive into what virtual machines are. So what is virtualization and what is a virtual machine? So virtualization is taking essentially a computer that like this one here, a laptop, or even a server that runs many different operating systems. It could be Windows, it could be Linux, it could be Windows Server, and even Mac if you want to live dangerous and violate some of their end user agreements. And virtualizing it, essentially, we're going to take the different hardware components that that computer has, the operating system, and virtualize all of it and put it on top of something that we call a hypervisor. A hypervisor is what allows us to actually do the different types of virtualization, and there's two main types of virtualization. There's type 1 virtualization, which is something that we install directly on a server, and there's type 2 virtualization, the one that you're actually going to go ahead and install today, which is a hypervisor software that you install on top of a pre-existing operating system. So let's give an example of type 1 and type 2 hypervisors. We'll start with type 1. So with a type 1 hypervisor, you're going to have that server. Generally, it's going to be a server. I mean, technically, you could do it on a laptop as well. And this is going to have all your hardware resources. It's going to have the actual CPU. It's going to have the RAM. It's going to have the hard drive space. And it's going to be all the physical resources that are allocated. And on top of this, you're going to go ahead and put your hypervisor. We've got server and hypervisor. I'm just going to put hyper. And this hypervisor is basically installed just like a regular operating system. However, it works a little bit different. This is actually what manages all the physical resources that the server has, and it divvies it out to the different virtual machines that you're going to install on top of it. So let's say we go ahead and install a virtual machine. It's going to be Windows. We have another one here that's going to be Linux, and maybe another one here that's Docker. And if you're not familiar with Docker is, make sure you check out my previous video. I went through installing Docker. It's really easy to set up. And from here, the hypervisor, this thing right here, is going to be the thing that allocates all the different resources to these virtual machines. So this hypervisor might allocate, I don't know, 10 gigs of RAM to this Windows operating system. It might allocate another 5 gigs of RAM to this Linux machine, and maybe only 1 gig of RAM to the Docker machine. It's also going to do the same thing for the hard drive, for the CPU, and all the different resources that are actually hosted on this server here. So type 2 hypervisors are a little bit different, but just as easy to understand. So in this case, we have that same physical server, computer, laptop, whatever it is. Just go ahead and put PC here for now. And on top of the PC, we're actually going to go ahead and run an operating system. Your traditional operating system, maybe like Windows 10. Win 10. And then on top of this is where we're going to actually install that hypervisor. Put hyper. H-Y-P-E-R. And then on top of that is where we're actually going to go ahead and install those virtual machines. So we might have a VM that is running Windows 10. So Windows 10 box inside, so a Windows 10 virtual machine inside of a Windows 10 box. Or we might have a Linux virtual machine, might be running Ubuntu. Or we might even have a Docker instance running in this one as well. But that's about it. The hypervisor does the same thing that it does in the type 1. It allocates the resources to those different virtual machines, and you can restrict those virtual machines from talking to each other, from talking to a host, or talking to anything at all, or you can allow them all to communicate on the network or to each other only. So with type 2 hypervisors, we have a couple different types of networking configurations that we can use. We can use one that's called NAT, network address translation, and essentially what that's going to do is allow the VM to actually talk to the outside world. It can reach your different network resources on your home network, or the internet. And how it's going to do that is by using the IP address of this host here. So it's actually going to use the same IP address that your computer is actually using. There's another type we can actually use, which is called bridged. And essentially this is going to pretend to use its virtual network interface card that's been assigned to it by the hypervisor here. And it's actually going to communicate to the network directly. If you have a router that's providing IP addresses, this virtual machine here will actually reach out and request its own IP address. And it'll have its own MAC address as well, so the router will push any traffic that's destined for this virtual machine here to it and only it. And any other traffic to your actual host down here will have its own traffic separated as well. This does decrease your security a little bit there, so you might not want to do it, but it is another option. Now, a third option we have is actually isolating the VM. We can actually deploy it and not allow it to talk to anything whatsoever. We can have this virtual machine here put on its own network segment where it can't actually talk to anything but itself, or we can have it set up to where the virtual machines can only talk to each other. So this Linux virtual machine that we have here might actually be able to talk to this Docker machine over here. And those are the only two that are allowed to talk to each other. They can't talk to the outside world, and they can't talk to this Windows box. So those are just a few different network configurations you can use for type 2 hypervisors, and something you're going to want to take into consideration, especially when you set up your own environment. But anyways, that's enough about virtualization. Let's go ahead and actually install your own type 2 hypervisor for free. Alright, so before you install the hypervisor on your computer, you actually need to configure your computer or your laptop to allow for virtualization. And to do that, you need to enter your BIOS settings. Now, to go ahead and do that, you're going to actually have to turn off your computer, and from there interrupt the boot up when you turn it back on by hitting a specific key. That key could be delete, it could be escape, it could be F2, F10. This is going to depend on your computer's manufacturer, and it's easily something that you can Google, or you can just restart it a whole bunch of times and hit those different keys and see which one gets you there. But let me show you how to do that. Alrighty, so once your computer or your laptop is turned off, you're going to go ahead and turn it back on, and as it's booting, you're going to want to go ahead and repeatedly hit that button that you Googled. For me, it's F10. It could be different for your computer, to interrupt the boot process and enter your BIOS menu. So I'm going to go ahead and turn mine back on. Go ahead and hit that F10 button. And there we go, we're in BIOS. Your menu is going to look a little bit different depending on the manufacturer. However, for the most part, the layout's going to be somewhat similar. But anyways, what we're looking for is enabling AMD V if you have an AMD processor in your laptop or your computer, or Intel virtualization if you're using a laptop or computer that has an Intel processor. The wording might be off a little bit, but essentially that's what you're looking for, allowing you to enable virtualization. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and navigate to configuration. And right here I have virtualization technology. Mine's enabled. If yours isn't, go ahead and press enter and change it. And then from there, go ahead and back out and press save. So since mine's good to go, I'm just going to go ahead and press escape and let it boot up. Now we can actually get into installing our hypervisor. Alright, so now that you've got your computer set up to actually use virtualization, we're going to go ahead and install our hypervisor, a type 2 hypervisor. In this case, it's going to be VMware's Workstation. There's many other ones out there like VirtualBox, but in this video, we're going to go ahead and install VMware Workstation, and it's free and it's easy to set up. So let's go ahead and do that. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you drop a comment down below. I cover all things tech. And when I hit 100 subscribers, I'm actually going to be giving away an orange pie to one lucky follower, so make sure you're definitely subscribed. But anyways, back to the video. So I'm going to switch over to my desktop and go ahead and open up Chrome, whatever browser you want to use. And from here, we're going to go ahead and actually search for VMware's Workstation Player. And if you don't feel like Googling it, I'll leave a link in the comments below as well so that you can actually just click on that and get straight to it. And once you're on the main page, you're going to scroll down and you're going to look for download now. We're using Windows in this case, and it's going to start downloading. VMware's Workstation is about 500 megs, so it might take a second for you to download. Now while you wait for that to download, VMware does recommend that your system at least have 4 gigs of RAM. Apparently it can work with 2. However, I recommend at least having 8 gigs of RAM, mainly depending on how many virtual machines you plan on running at once. And you're also going to want to have at least a couple hundred gigs of storage space. You don't need that much, but you're going to need to allocate some of that storage space to your virtual machine, and you don't want to be limiting your physical resources as well. It just gives you a better experience, but it doesn't require much, and you can actually delete those virtual machines and recover that space as needed. Alright, now it's done downloading. Let's actually go ahead and configure it. Alrighty, so you're going to go to the location where you actually saved your file at. For me, it's most likely going to be the downloads folder. It'll probably be the same for you. And you're going to go ahead and double click it to run it. Now you're going to get a Windows prompt to ask if you really want to go ahead and run it. Just go ahead and click yes and let it continue to run. And depending on whether or not your computer is completely updated, you might get some sort of warning telling you that it wants you to finish an update for something else and require you to restart. If you need to do that, just go ahead and do it real quick and then just come back to this step again. Alright, so now we're just going to go ahead and go through the wizard. We're going to accept the license agreement. And we're honestly going to kind of just do next on everything. You can go ahead and keep this option checked if you want it to automatically look for updates when it starts up. And you can go ahead and disable this one if you don't want your information being sent out to VMware. Go ahead and click next. Go ahead and click next on that and install. Alrighty, so once it finishes installing, you'll get this window here. Just go ahead and click finish and you're done. Your hypervisor is completely installed. You can actually start installing virtual machines at this point. But before we do that, we're going to actually need an ISO file. And an ISO file is basically like a virtual CD where you have your operating system on. And you're going to go ahead and essentially plug that virtual CD in, run the ISO file on the hypervisor, and install your virtual machine. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and do Kali Linux. So let's go ahead and search for that first. So open back up Google, search for Kali Linux download. Go ahead and click on Get Kali. Alright, you're going to go ahead and click Installer Images. Scroll down slightly and go ahead and click the recommended option. Now be aware it is about 4 gigs, so you're going to need a little bit of space to download this thing. Now while that downloads, if you're interested in also installing a Ubuntu virtual machine, you can go ahead and pull that image down while you're doing this as well. So you can open up another new tab or just navigate from this one, whatever you want to do, and just Google Ubuntu download. Now if you don't feel like searching for it, I'll just go ahead and leave the link down below so that you can just click straight on it as well. Now you're just going to scroll down a little bit to the LTS version. Your version may differ a little bit depending on when you're watching this video, and click download. And it'll go ahead and start downloading as well.
5 minutes later.
Man, that took forever. Alright, now that it's done downloading, we're actually going to go ahead and deploy this virtual machine, install it using our hypervisor so that we can actually use it. So we'll go ahead and minimize this and open up Virtual Workstation. And we're just going to use the free version of it. So go ahead and click continue, finish. And from here, we're going to go ahead and create a new virtual machine. This might happen, you might get some sort of update. I'm just going to skip it for now or just remind me later. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and select the installer disk image version and select browse. Navigate to where you downloaded those ISO images, and we'll go ahead and start with Kali Linux. So just select the ISO and click open. We'll go ahead and select next. And this may pop up as Ubuntu. We'll just make sure that it's checked as Linux and just leave it as Ubuntu since both Kali Linux and Ubuntu are Debian based. Now from here, this is going to ask you where you want to save your virtual machine. For some reason, it always defaults to documents. Sometimes I'll change it, but I'm just going to leave it as documents for now. This is the hard drive space, so how much hard drive space you want to give it. It's recommended 20 gigs, so I'm just going to leave mine at 20 gigs. And you can just leave it as default as splitting the disk up into multiple files. And we can go ahead and customize our hardware now if we want to, but I'll just leave and click finish. Alright, so now we can go ahead and turn on our Kali Linux VM. So we'll just double click on it and that'll start up. So we'll go ahead and use that graphical install. Just double click inside of it and then just hit enter, and that should map you into your virtual machine. And then in the event you need to get out of it, just go ahead and hit Control Alt at the same time, and that should get your mouse out of the virtual machine in case you get stuck inside the virtual machine and wonder why you can't get your mouse outside of it. But anyways, I'm gonna click back into it. I'm gonna select English and click continue. United States, if that's where I'm at. I'm just gonna use American English as the keyboard. It's detecting the hardware that the hypervisor has provided it. And if we want to see that, we can go ahead and actually click on player real quick and go ahead and click on manage and then virtual machine settings. And we can see here that we allocated 4 gigs of RAM to it, 2 processors, 20 gigs of hard drive space. You can obviously manipulate that as needed. That's going to show you what the recommended amount is for the virtual machine. It is recommended to have 4 gigs. However, technically we could make it work off of 2 gigs as well. But anyways, alright, so we're going to go back here and give a name for this virtual machine. I'm just going to leave it as Kali and click continue. Domain name if you have one. I don't have one, I'm just going to click continue. So we're going to go ahead and create a user account. I'm just going to name this Keith. Click enter. Select a username for this. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as Keith. And now we need to give it a password. I'm going to make mine easy. Confirm it, press enter. Going to go ahead and configure the clock. I'm just going to leave it as Eastern. You can obviously switch yours. Now it's going to detect that hard drive that we provided it, that 20 gig hard drive. We'll just use the guided option, which is going to go ahead and use the entire disk that we provided it, which is 20 gigs. Click continue. Click continue. We're just going to go ahead and use the recommended option. Click continue again. If you continue, list below will be overwritten. We already know that it's going to be overwritten. There's nothing on there because we just created this mini virtual hard drive. So we'll click yes and continue. And now it's actually installing Kali Linux.
5 minutes later.
Alrighty, so you're going to get a prompt for some recommended downloads. I'm just going to leave the selected ones and click continue. Alrighty, so now it's going to ask if you want to install the Grub bootloader. You can just go ahead and click yes. Then you're going to want to select the Dev SDA option here, click continue, and let that install. So once that's done, you're just going to go ahead and click continue. It's going to finish the installation and it should go ahead and restart. Now you should still be in the VM, so just click enter and it should start booting. And there we go. We got our official Kali Linux virtual machine. Now you're going to go ahead and enter that username and password that you configured during the setup. So for me, it's Keith. And we are in our Kali Linux virtual machine. Now this is going to act just like any other operating system or Kali Linux that's installed on a computer, except it's in a virtual environment on top of Windows. You can actually go here to your terminal and you can run an IPA, and that'll show you what your current IP address is. Since it defaults to NAT for its configuration, it's actually going to have its own virtual IP address, which it shares between itself and the host to communicate. And from there, that's going to be translated to the host IP address, the computer IP address that your computer or laptop uses to access the network. And I should be able to get to the internet if it's configured correctly, which it should be. If your main computer can get to it, you're able to as well. So from here, I should be able to just go to google.com. And there you go, I've got access. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing to install another virtual machine, Ubuntu. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can just go ahead and call it here. However, if you want to go ahead and install it and have the two virtual machines communicate with each other and isolate them from touching anything else so you can actually practice hacking those virtual machines, then you're going to want to also download another virtual machine. And you could use Linux, but we're just going to go ahead and use Ubuntu so we have another option. So we can go ahead and close out of this, and we'll go ahead and shut this virtual machine down just so we're not wasting resources. So we can just click X on that. All right, so now we're going to open up Workstation one more time, and we're going to create a new virtual machine again. Going to select that ISO option, browse, and we're going to select that Ubuntu ISO, or whatever virtual machine ISO you decided to download. You can actually install Windows 10 as well. And if you'd like me to create a video on that, I can show you too, but it's pretty easy. We'll click Next. So we're actually going to go ahead and configure the username that we're going to use in the virtual machine here. Some virtual machine setups are a little bit different, so you might get different options depending on what operating system you're installing. So my name's going to be Keith, username Keith, and I'm just going to configure my password. Hit Next. We'll just leave the virtual machine name the same. You can change it if you'd like. Next. I'm just going to leave the standard 20 gigs for the hard drive space and leave the default to split the virtual machine files up, the hard disk files up as needed. Click Next, Next, and let that start. Go ahead and widescreen this. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and walk through the setup steps. So we've got our keyboard layout. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that as English. Just going to do a regular normal installation and let it download the updates while it's installing. Click Continue. Make this full screen. Go ahead and allow it to erase the entire disk. Now don't worry, this isn't your host or your other virtual machine's hard drive. It's just the virtual hard drive that we created for this virtual machine. So we'll go ahead and click Install Now. Click Continue. And let it do its thing. Alright, I'm just going to leave mine as New York since I'm on the eastern side. My name is Keith. Just leave this as Keith as well. Keith is good, and configure this password. Now it's going to tell me my password's short, but it should allow me to continue and allow it to go through the install. Alrighty, so once it's finished installing, you're going to go ahead and restart it. Click Restart Now and allow it to reboot. And that's it. You should be able to log in now. Cool, I'm in. I'll go ahead and open up the shell prompt and do an IPA on this to see what IP address it got. And you can see it also got one of those virtual IPs that it uses to communicate between itself and the host since we're using NAT. And now I want to cover the networking a little bit more. So I told you that this does have a virtual NAT IP, right? And you can actually go up here to see the configuration for that. Go to Manage, Virtual Machine Settings. And from here, you can see that we've configured NAT. Now, if we want to switch it to where this virtual machine can directly connect to your home network and pull its own IP address, you can actually switch that to Bridge right here and actually have it mapped to a specific adapter. Now, when you click this, it's going to ask you if you're sure you really want to do it. So we'll go ahead and click that and click Continue. So Bridge. And from here, you can select the physical network adapter that your computer has that you want to map it to its virtual network adapter. And you might not have as many options here. It just depends on how many ports that your system has. Some of these are going to be virtual adapters that have been configured as Virtual Workstation was actually installed, and some of these will be your actual physical NICs as well. And they'll probably start with something like the Realtek PCIe. Might depend, just depending on what your manufacturer's computer is. But anyway, so we're going to leave that alone. And I'm actually going to switch this over to custom because I don't want this to be able to talk out. I only want it to be able to talk to itself and the Kali Linux box that I have. So I'll switch this over to custom, and I can just switch this over to VMnet too. That's fine. I'm not going to do these updates now. And now I'm actually going to go ahead and turn on that other virtual machine that we created as well. So I'll minimize this. Open up Workstation again. Right click it and open it. And I'm going to go ahead and open up that first virtual machine. I'm going to allow it to boot up. And now, depending on how many resources you have, you might be starting to bottleneck a little bit here. Your system might be getting a little sluggish, or your virtual machine might be getting a little sluggish. And to see how much resources are being consumed while you have these virtual machines on, you can actually open up Task Manager. So I just do Control-Shift-Escape. There we go. And then I go over to my performance, and I can see how much CPU utilization is being used, how much memory I'm using. I've got 32 gigs here, only using about 11. So you can see giving these virtual machines too many resources could definitely bottleneck you. But anyway, so I got this up. I'll go ahead and click in here and log in. And while that's logging in, I'll switch this over to that VMnet 2 as well. So go here, switch it over to VMnet 2. And click OK. And these virtual machines are actually set up for DHCP, which is Dynamic Host Control Protocol. Basically, they're going to reach out on the network and see if a router will provide them with an IP address. But since we're putting them on VMnet 2, they're not able to reach out or talk to anything. So we need to manually configure their IP address. So we're going to go ahead and click on this. Click on Settings, Advanced Network Configuration. I'll go here to Wired. Click Settings. I will go over to IPv4. And you can configure whatever address you want for it, but I'm just going to go ahead and give it a 192 IP address. So I'll click Add. I'll give it a 192.168.0.1, and the net mask will be 24. And I'm not going to worry about configuring a gateway. And I'll click Save. I'll close that. And now we're going to configure the network settings for the Ubuntu virtual machine. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to click on Settings. We're already in network, but if you're not, just go ahead and find it. You might have to scroll down. We'll go ahead and click Settings. We'll go to IPv4. We'll switch to manual. And this one's going to be 192.168.0.2 with a mask of 24. And we'll just leave the gateway alone. And we'll click Apply. And we'll go ahead and turn this network card off and back on, because sometimes, even though you've applied it, it doesn't actually take effect. And it might be true for Kali Linux as well, we'll see. But now we'll open up that terminal and we'll do an IPA to see the new IP address. And you can see here that this IP address is now changed. And we'll do the same thing over here. We'll open up a terminal, we'll do IPA, and we can see that the IP address has taken effect. And now let's see if this Kali Linux virtual machine can actually ping over to this Ubuntu machine. So we'll do a ping 192.168.0.2. And sure enough, it can ping. Now let's see if this can ping over there. 192.168.0.1. And sure enough, it can ping as well. So these virtual machines can talk to each other, but they can't actually talk to anything else. They can't talk to anything on your network. They can't talk to your host, your computer host that they're running on, or the internet. And this is great if you want to simulate some cyber attacks and practice your hacking skills between these virtual machines or whatever other virtual machine that you decide to deploy. And Kali Linux comes pre-installed with several different hacking tools here. You can look at a lot of these right here and actually run through some of them. And I'm going to create some how-tos on that in my future upcoming videos. So make sure you subscribe. Now I have two other tips that I wanted to share with you. One of them was actually connecting a physical device, like maybe you have an external hard drive, to the virtual machine so that you can access the hard drive if needed. So to do that, all you have to do is go up here and click on removable devices, and from here you'll select the actual device that you want to connect to the virtual machine, and you'll just click connect, which will connect it to the virtual machine but disconnect it from the host. So you won't actually see the option to access that hard drive if you have an external hard drive on your main computer out here. However, you will see it pop up here in the virtual machine itself. And the same thing works with USB devices. If you have some sort of CAC reader, like maybe a smart card reader of some sort or anything like that, you'll be able to connect it directly to the virtual machine. Additionally, if you wanted to create a shared folder where you have some sort of folder that's on your actual physical computer and you want to share that folder so that the system itself can access it, you can actually do that over here. Go to Manage, Virtual Machine Settings, you go to Options, and then you go down here to Share Folders, and you'll just enable it. You can either enable it until the virtual machine is powered off, or you can leave it always enabled. And from here, you'll just click Add. Let's say we have a folder in our Downloads folder. We'll just go ahead and browse to that folder. So let's go ahead and create one real quick. I'm in my Downloads folder, which is on my actual computer. This isn't part of the virtual machine. And I'll go ahead and create a folder called VM folder. And I'll even put a new text document in there. There we go. Well, from here I can browse there and actually connect this folder to the virtual machine. So I'll go down to Downloads and then VM folder and click OK. And next, enable this share. I can decide if I want to read only, so I can't actually configure anything or put anything in that folder from the VM, and click Finish and click OK. And that's it. You've configured a shared folder. Now to access that folder from the virtual machine itself, we just go ahead and open up our File Explorer, which you can do here. And we'll actually go down to Other Locations. We'll go to Computer. We'll go to MNT, which is for Mount, stands for Mount. We'll have this HDFS folder that'll pop up, and there's your VM folder. We can go in it and we see that new text document there. So I can actually make some changes to it. This is a change from the VM, and I'll save it with the Control S, and I'll close out of it. And now if I go out of this virtual machine and actually open that same text document back up from my main computer, those are my changes. So that's it. That's how you actually share a folder to your virtual machine if you decided you wanted to do that. And one additional cool thing about virtual machines is that you can actually use them to connect to VPNs. So instead of connecting your computer to a VPN, which might restrict your internet access depending on what your VPN provider provides you with, you can actually run a virtual machine and run the virtual private network software inside of that, so that the virtual machine is the only thing that connects via VPN, and your actual computer is still able to access your regular internet. I actually used to do this a lot at work. I would have 2 to 3 virtual machines open. One would be connected to my home VPN and one would be connected to my work VPN, and my main computer would just be connected to the regular network that wherever I'm at, so that I could access both networks as needed without having to completely restrict my entire computer. And that's actually what the Hack the Box organization recommends to do as well, to connect a virtual machine to the Hack the Box VPN so that you can reach their environment rather than use your actual computer. And you should actually do this with a lot of other things just to keep yourself safe as you traverse the internet, and many other things. You can keep yourself on an encrypted virtual private network rather than just going across the dirty internet. And one quick note, the great thing about these virtual machines is that no one generally knows what VMware Workstation is. So if you use this as your daily driver and do all of your browsing in there, you can actually close it out and no one will ever see any of your history. So that's pretty cool to know, especially for you guys who go on some of those sketchy websites. And another great thing is if you decide to go to some of those sketchy websites and your host gets infected, for the most part, it's going to actually keep itself isolated. So you can just go ahead and delete the virtual machine and not have to worry about infecting your entire host. Now, this isn't holding true for everything. There are some very sophisticated attacks and malware out there that can detect that it's in a virtual machine and find a way outside of the virtual environment. But also, let me show you how to create a copy of these virtual machines, just in case you got your virtual machine set up exactly how you want it to, and you want to create a backup in the event something happens to it and you have to delete it. So we'll switch back over to that desktop. And from here, you're going to navigate to where you configured your virtual machines to be stored. If you left it as default, it's most likely Documents. And you go to Virtual Machines, and you'll see your virtual machines here. Now, one thing you want to do prior to doing this is making sure they're actually turned off. So I'm not going to worry about it right now, it's not a big deal, but you'll go here and you literally just Control-C, copy it, and paste it somewhere else. And this will take a few minutes. And if you do actually copy this virtual machine while it's on, you're going to notice that when you go into this folder, there are some .lck files, which are locked files. And essentially these files are created when the virtual machine is running to prevent other people from opening that virtual machine. And when you copy this virtual machine while it's on, it gets copied over and it would actually prevent you from actually opening the virtual machine and using it. So if you do make a copy of it, just go in there and delete those files so that you can actually open it. However, I would just recommend avoiding that completely, turning the virtual machine all the way off, and then going ahead and making a copy prior to actually doing anything else. But anyways, that's virtualization. So today we covered what a virtual machine is. We went over the different types, type 1 and type 2. We installed a type 2 hypervisor, and we installed 2 virtual machines and got them to talk to each other and isolated them from being able to talk to anything else. Now in my future videos, I'm actually going to show you how to install a type 1 hypervisor if you decide to do that, so you can actually get more of a real enterprise feel if you're trying to get into the IT field. And I'm also going to show you how to hack between these virtual machines as well. So make sure you subscribe if you're definitely interested in this. Also, leave a comment down below letting me know what you want me to cover next. I cover all things IT. I go over things like IT career fields, certifications, and many other things as well. I appreciate you guys for sticking around. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.